feeling trapped. Psalm 140. Divine prayer, shield against enemies and restore peace. Act now. Do you feel trapped, weighed down by forces beyond your control, as if every step forward meets an unseen resistance? It's as though life itself has conspired against your peace, leaving you drained and uncertain. These moments of oppression, whether from toxic relationships, workplace conflicts, mental anguish, or even spiritual battles, can feel isolating and overwhelming. But what if you were never meant to fight these battles alone? Psalm 140 is not merely a collection of poetic words. It is a battle cry, a divine declaration of trust, and a supernatural shield for those who feel surrounded by enemies. David's cry for deliverance, a man pursued, betrayed, and threatened, becomes a timeless anthem for anyone seeking refuge in the midst of chaos. He faced giants, both literal and spiritual, and in those moments of unparalleled vulnerability, he turned to God with a sense of raw desperation. And so, the big question arises: how does this ancient psalm, written in a wildly different time and place, speak directly into your life today? How can its words shield you, guide you, and restore a peace you may feel is lost to the noise of modern life? Imagine the unseen battles you face, the worries that claw at your mind late at night, the emotional traps that drain your energy, and the very real forces of negativity that seem to permeate your world. And now, picture a shield raised in front of you, not of human strength, but of divine power. This imagery is what Psalm 140 invites you to embrace. This video will take you into the heart of this psalm, unraveling its meaning and uncovering its practical relevance. You'll learn not only how this sacred text protects your spirit, but also how it empowers you to reclaim your peace and purpose. You'll discover a spiritual strategy for times of fear, uncertainty, and struggle. This is not just a message for the spiritually elite. It's for those who are tired of running, tired of fearing, and ready to stand firm in divine protection. Stay with me, because this isn't another surface-level explanation. This is a transformative exploration of an ancient truth made new. Psalm 140 isn't just about survival, it's about victory. It speaks to the human heart in its darkest hours and offers hope for deliverance, not someday, but now. As we break down this psalm together, let this be a moment of awakening, a turning point where you decide to act, pray, and live under the powerful shield of faith. The invisible enemies of today. What are you truly fighting against? This question lingers quietly in the background of our lives, often going unanswered. It's easy to point fingers at the obvious culprits: challenging relationships, an unfair boss, or difficult circumstances that hold you back. But how often do we stop to look deeper, beyond the surface, to uncover the real enemies? Those that remain hidden, operating silently yet destructively, consuming our peace and our sense of purpose. These are today's invisible enemies, far more dangerous because we fail to recognize them for what they are. Take a moment to examine how negativity touches your life, often without you noticing it. Toxic relationships may surround you, draining your energy and your ability to trust. Environments saturated with gossip, conflict, or manipulation can weigh on your spirit in ways you don't fully understand until you feel completely burnt out. Then there is the constant noise of comparison, amplified by a digital world that never sleeps. Social media bombards you with curated illusions of others' successes, happiness, and perfection, making you feel as though you were running a losing race. These unseen forces creep into your everyday life, clouding your mind and emotions slowly but relentlessly. They don't scream, they whisper. And this is precisely why they're so dangerous. The real threat, however, often lies underneath all of this. Have you considered how much of the battle isn't external but internal? Anxiety quietly loops through your mind, convincing you that fear is your only companion. Self-doubt clouds your ability to see your potential, locking you in an endless cycle of questioning your worth. There's also the persistent lure of temptation, promising quick relief but delivering long-term emptiness instead. And despair's the most crushing enemy of all works to choke out any remaining light, leaving you in a state of hopelessness that feels inescapable. These spiritual battles are not new. They have plagued humanity since the beginning. What's different now is how modern life magnifies them, bombarding us with distractions and pressures that keep us from addressing them head-on. This is exactly where the wisdom of Psalm 140 speaks directly into today's struggles. David's enemies were not only seen but unseen. On the surface, it appeared as though he was simply fleeing from physical dangers, violent men, forces actively seeking his destruction. But there was a deeper layer to his prayer. David cried to God because the threats against him touched his very soul. When he prayed, "Rescue me, Lord, from evildoers. Protect me from the violent," those words weren't limited to swords and traps. They reflected the crushing weight of betrayal, the wounds inflicted by deceitful words, and the spiritual turmoil that left him gasping for deliverance. Is this any different from what consumes us today? Violence doesn't always come from fists or weapons. It comes in much subtler forms. The rejection of someone you thought would stand by you, the mental exhaustion from facing criticism after criticism, or the deep sadness from unfulfilled dreams. This kind of violence leaves no visible scars, but it cuts far deeper, threatening to erode your sense of worth, your faith, and your stability. These silent battles are what makes Psalm 140 so urgently relevant. Identifying these enemies is the beginning of freedom. The most cunning trick of any adversary is to convince you it doesn't exist. But when you pause, when you reflect on your life and dig below the surface, clarity begins to emerge. What are the forces shaking your sense of peace? Is it the weight of constant expectation, the shadow of past mistakes, the hopelessness that comes when you feel no progress is being made, no matter how much effort you give? Only when you take a hard look at these invisible forces can you begin the process of standing against them. And that's where Psalm 140 does something extraordinary. This prayer is not simply a plea for God to intervene. It's a declaration of trust. Trust in a shield that cannot break, in a deliverance that cannot fail. It's the reminder we need that this battle is not ours to fight alone. God invites us into his refuge, into his protection, because he knows the enemies we face and he knows what they're trying to take from us. Every battle inside your heart, every invisible trap in your soul is known to him, and the shield he offers is not for someday, but for right now. As we dive further into this message, prepare to understand not only the power of this psalm, but how its truths can arm you with what you need to fight back, stronger than ever. A psalm written for warriors. Imagine yourself surrounded on every side, facing betrayal from those you trusted, threats from people who want to see you fall, and dangers lurking in both the shadows and the open. It feels like a scene from history, too distant to be relatable, and yet isn't this a reality many face today? The enemies may not wield swords, and the battleground may not be literal, but the feeling of being under siege, cornered by forces working against your peace, is universal. This makes Psalm 140 not just a sacred text from antiquity, but an anthem for the modern-day warrior. Someone who faces relentless pressures and knows they need something greater than themselves to survive. When David wrote this psalm, he wasn't sitting in safety, reflecting on life from a peaceful perspective. This was written in desperation, likely during one of the most dangerous moments of his life, as he fled from men who sought to destroy him. He was not a man waxing poetic for the sake of beauty. He was a king in waiting, hunted by jealous rivals and betrayed by his own people. But Psalm 140 goes far deeper than begging for physical protection. The words echo with emotional and spiritual depth, revealing a man striving to hold on to faith in the face of overwhelming turmoil. David cries out, "Rescue me, Lord, from evildoers. Protect me from the violent." On one level, this plea was a direct response to the enemies pursuing him, but its tone carries a universal truth. David wasn't just asking for deliverance from people plotting his downfall. He was asking for God, too. Shield his heart from the poison of fear, despair, and vengeance. In that ancient moment of desperation, David was expressing a battle cry that is still relevant for anyone facing betrayal, injustice, or oppression today. His plea is raw and real. They make their tongues as sharp as a serpent's. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Have you ever felt the sting of someone's words piercing your heart? Words spoken with cruelty can leave wounds that no one else can see, yet their consequences are just as profound. What makes David's prayer so timeless is how it acknowledges the unique pain caused by deceit, slander, and manipulation, the enemies that don't attack your body but your spirit. This psalm, in its essence, is a prayer of the warrior. It doesn't focus on the warrior's strength, but on the need for the ultimate source of protection, God's intervention. This is where its power resonates across generations. We can relate to David's vulnerability. We, too, are warriors caught in our battles, not against physical swords, but against the sharpness of words, the weight of circumstances, and the pressures of a world that feels like it's always closing in. David teaches us a key lesson here. God doesn't just protect the body, He shields the soul. In a world where people are constantly on edge, clinging to their own efforts to find power or solutions, Psalm 140 offers something radically different. It provides a path not to self-reliance, but to divine reliance. David finds no safety in his own ability to outsmart or outrun his enemies. Instead, his strength comes from surrender, from actively lifting his fears to God. Today, the battles may look different, but the need for divine strength remains the same. Perhaps your battlefield is a hostile workplace, a toxic relationship, or the overwhelming challenge of fighting for mental clarity in a world of constant noise. Like David, we need refuge not just from external threats, but from the ones within. The subtle temptations to give in to anger, bitterness, or despair are just as harmful as any enemy you might face on the outside. This is what makes Psalm 140 a psalm of warriors. The act of turning to God, crying out for protection, and trusting in His power is a declaration of strength, not weakness. It reflects a mindset that knows the battle is real, but also knows the victory doesn't have to come from personal effort alone. Throughout history, countless believers have turned to Psalm 140 in their own struggles. Its words have served as both a prayer and a reminder that no matter how dire the circumstances may seem, there is a refuge that enemies can't penetrate. When we pray this psalm, we are not merely asking for deliverance. We are stepping into a centuries-old tradition of spiritual warfare. We're joining the ranks of countless warriors who reached the end of their strength and called on the one force capable of carrying them forward, the shield of divine protection. This psalm was written for those in the trenches, for anyone who feels the weight of life pressing down on them. David knew the pain of betrayal, the fear of uncertainty, and the exhaustion of constant battle, and that is why his words remain alive today. When you pray through Psalm 140, you take on the posture of a warrior, but one standing behind the ultimate shield, knowing that God's power is greater than any enemy you will ever face. Emotional breakdown of Psalm 140. When you read Psalm 140, you must go beyond the surface of its words to feel its emotional intensity, to hear the cry of a man clinging to God in desperation, and to grasp the depth of its timeless power. Each line pulses with urgency, painted with the raw emotions of fear, pain, and an unshakable faith. It's a prayer that exposes the fragility of the human heart while simultaneously declaring the strength of divine protection. To break it down, we must feel it as David did, understanding the world he was living in and how those words can deeply resonate with our own. The psalm begins with a plea that immediately sets the tone. Rescue me, Lord, from evildoers. Protect me from the violent. These are not carefully crafted words of poetic reflection. They are a cry for survival. This is the voice of someone standing on the edge of destruction, aware that danger is not coming, it's already here. David's fear is palpable. He names his enemies as evildoers and violent men, people actively plotting harm, with malice burning in their intentions. But his words reflect not only a fear for his safety, but an awareness of his own limitations. David knows that, on his own, he cannot outrun or outwit what's coming for him. The intensity builds as he describes the threats against him. They make their tongues as sharp as a serpent's. The poison of vipers is on their lips. This imagery is as vivid and biting as the attacks themselves. David's enemies don't just hold weapons, they wield words that cut just as deeply. He paints their malice in terms we can all relate to, the venom of gossip, slander, and manipulation. Words spoken with the intent to wound can linger in the heart for years, and David captures that lasting pain in a way that transcends time. But there's more to this than just describing his situation. Every phrase of this prayer reveals David's spiritual posture. He's honest about the fight before him, but doesn't succumb to panic. Instead, with every cry for rescue, he reaffirms who he believes holds the ultimate authority. By bringing his fears directly to God, he's acknowledging that divine intervention is his only source of true protection. In doing this, David models what we so often avoid, laying down our self-reliance and admitting, I can't do this alone. He continues, keep me safe, Lord, from the hands of the wicked. Protect me from the violent, who devise ways to trip my feet. Here, his plea becomes even more personal. The danger is no longer abstract. He's aware of traps being set specifically for him. Imagine walking through life knowing that others are plotting your downfall. For many of us, it's not hard to relate to this. Whether it's people actively working against us or circumstances designed to wear us down, we've all felt the weight of unseen forces working to trip us up. What makes this psalm so unique, however, is its transition from fear to confidence. David doesn't stop at pleading. He shifts into a declaration of trust in God's justice. I know that the Lord secures justice for the poor and upholds the cause of the needy. This isn't blind optimism. It's the grounding of someone who has seen God intervene in the past and is convinced he will do so again. David's faith is deeply rooted in the character of God. He is a deliverer, the protector of the weak, and the champion of those in need. As you break this psalm down line by line, you realize that it's more than just a prayer for protection, it's a roadmap. It teaches us how to respond in moments of vulnerability, betrayal, and threat. David's method is clear. Confront the reality of the situation, name your fear, and then place it squarely in God's hands. It's a movement from complete honesty about human weakness to absolute confidence in divine strength. By the end of the psalm, the tone has shifted completely. Surely the righteous will praise your name. and the upright will live in your presence. These words are not hopeful speculation, they are declarations of victory. David lays down not only his fear but his enemies themselves at God's feet. He looks forward, already envisioning the joy that will come from God's deliverance. It is a promise not rooted in circumstances but in the unchanging nature of God's justice. The emotional power of Psalm 140 comes alive when you allow yourself to sit with its highs and lows, to feel its urgency, its pain, its hope, and its unwavering faith. These aren't just David's words. They are the cries of anyone who has ever faced overwhelming odds. Therefore you, too. If your heart has ever felt heavy with fear or weighed down by attacks, whether from people, circumstances, or even spiritual forces, you're standing in David's shoes. And his path forward is clear. Name your fear, declare your dependence on God, and trust Him to fight the battle for you. Activating your divine shield. Psalm 140 isn't just a prayer to read. It's a shield meant to be activated. The words of David remind us that there is a divine protection available to each of us, but it requires something critical: action. This isn't about passive hope or waiting for something to happen. It's about stepping into the promises of God with intention and trust, deliberately placing your life and your battles into His hands. When this psalm is prayed with a heart open to the divine, it becomes a living, breathing source of strength, transforming anxiety into peace, fear into resilience, and uncertainty into faith. But what does it look like to activate this shield? Start by recognizing that Psalm 140 is a direct, urgent plea. David's words carry the weight of someone who knows the enemy is near and that the battle has already begun. This is not a soft, reserved prayer. It is a bold cry for help. To activate this divine shield, you have to meet this same urgency with your own honesty. What are you battling right now? What feels like it's pressing against your peace? Identify it and lift it up in prayer with the same raw dependence that David displayed. There's no space here for half-hearted prayers. This is about full surrender, the kind of faith that trusts God will act even before you see the evidence. Prayer is often misunderstood as a ritual, but Psalm 140 teaches us that it is a weapon, a tool for drawing divine protection into the very fabric of your life. Imagine turning David's words into your own declaration of faith. When you say, "Rescue me, Lord, from evildoers. Protect me from the violent," you're not just repeating a historical text. You're stepping into the same spiritual posture as David, reminding yourself and the world around you that the forces working against you do not have the final say. This intentional alignment with God's power is what takes a prayer from passive to active. Another key element of activating your shield is visualization. Close your eyes and imagine the protection of God surrounding your shield that no enemy can penetrate, a fortress that cannot be shaken. Visualizing this divine protection isn't just a mental exercise, it's a spiritual one. Science even tells us that the brain responds to visualization by calming the nervous system and reducing stress. By focusing your thoughts on the promises of Psalm 140, you're not only connecting with God on a spiritual level, but you're reprogramming your mind to find peace in His presence. In addition to visualization, gratitude is another spiritual practice that brings the words of this psalm to life. Even as David cried out for deliverance, he declared his trust in God's justice. Gratitude may seem difficult when you're in the midst of a struggle, but it is one of the most effective ways to activate faith. Begin by thanking God, even before you see the answers. Thank Him for being your refuge, for the ways He has already protected you that you can't even see, and for the victories that are yet to come. Gratitude doesn't just shift your perspective, it aligns your heart with God's will and creates space for His peace to fill you. Journaling can also deepen your connection to Psalm 140. Write down your own version of David's prayer, naming the battles you're facing and surrendering them to God. When you put your fears and burdens on paper, something powerful happens, a release, a turning over of control that mirrors what David did. Use his words as a starting point, then pour out your heart. This process transforms the psalm into something deeply personal, your own cry for protection and deliverance. But activating your divine shield doesn't stop with individual reflection. Psalm 140 is also a call to community. When David wrote, "I know that the Lord secures justice for the poor and upholds the cause of the needy," he recognized that his protection wasn't just for him alone. As you activate your shield, consider how you can also extend that sense of protection to others. Pray for the people around you who are battling unseen enemies and offer them the same hope. Just as David's prayer has uplifted millions throughout history, your prayers and encouragement can become a shield for someone else. Finally, understand that activating Psalm 140's power is not a one-time event. It's a daily commitment, especially in the face of life's ongoing battles. When enemies, visible or invisible, push back against you, return to this prayer. Repeat its words. Visualize its promises. Speak them over your life until they shape your reality. Psalm 140 is a living shield, forged for the moments when you feel weak, vulnerable, or exposed. But it only becomes active when you choose to pick it up. You don't need to endure this fight unarmed or alone. The shield is already there, waiting for you to take hold of it. The science of faith and peace. Faith has always been viewed as a spiritual matter, something deeply personal and sacred. But what if faith also has a direct impact on our physical and mental well-being? Psalm 140's plea for deliverance and protection isn't just a spiritual exercise. It aligns with what modern science now understands about the profound effect that prayer, trust, and surrender can have on the human mind and body. When David turned to God in desperation, he not only engaged his spirit, but he connected to a process that soothes the mind, lowers stress, and re-establishes peace within. Faith, it turns out, is just as essential for the body as it is for the soul. When the human brain encounters challenges, stress, or fear, it switches into survival mode. This is known as the fight or flight response, an automatic reaction designed to protect us from danger. But in modern life, there is rarely a clear outlet for that surge of adrenaline and cortisol, the stress chemicals released during these moments. Whether from toxic environments, overwhelming pressure, or invisible enemies like self-doubt and anxiety, the brain can stay in this heightened state for far too long. Over time, this leads to burnout, fatigue, and even physical ailments. Constant exposure to this stress mode keeps your body locked in overdrive, making peace seem like an unattainable dream. Here's where faith steps in. Prayer, like the one David offers in Psalm 140, creates a mental shift. Studies in neurology have shown that deliberate prayer and meditation activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the body's natural calming mechanism. When David cried out to God, "Rescue me, Lord, from evildoers. Protect me from the violent," his words were not just a release of spiritual dependence, but also a biological one. By surrendering his fear to something greater than himself, David initiated a calming response in his brain. This is the same biological effect we experience today when we pray sincerely or meditate on truth. Faith is not just a belief, it's an action that rewires the nervous system and brings immediate physical relief. But it doesn't stop there. Trust, an essential part of faith, has enormous implications for mental health. When you trust God to shield you, as David did, you're effectively telling your mind that it doesn't need to carry the full weight of the battle. Trust redirects the burden from your own shoulders to the hands of one who promises to act on your behalf. This release of control prevents the cycle of rumination, the endless replaying of fears and worst-case scenarios in your mind. It breaks the loop that anxiety thrives on and allows space for peace to take root. Faith teaches us to let go, and in doing so, it shields us from the physical and emotional damage of prolonged stress. The science behind gratitude offers another insight into Psalm 140's connection to peace. Gratitude, as expressed through faith and prayer, has been shown to increase dopamine and serotonin levels in the brain, the very chemicals responsible for happiness and well-being. When David thanks God for his justice and protection, even in the midst of his struggles, he's not only affirming his trust, but actively shifting his brain's chemistry toward a more hopeful and resilient state. Gratitude draws the mind away from fear and focuses it on what is good, what is true, and what is unshakable. Modern science also validates the power of community in faith. Another dimension found in Psalm 140, when David speaks of the righteous and the upright, he acknowledges the collective strength of believers standing together. Neuropsychologists have observed that connecting with others in shared prayers or acts of faith releases oxytocin, the hormone responsible for bonding and trust. Oxytocin not only strengthens your emotional resilience, but also builds a sense of safety and belonging. The enemy loves isolation, but Psalm 140 reminds us of the power found in collective faith, a community shielded together under God's protection. Finally, faith provides a mental anchor. The chaos of daily life, its endless uncertainties, pressures, and struggles often leaves us feeling adrift. Psalm 140 gives that anchor by offering two profound assurances. First, that God is just and in control, and, second, that his protection is active and real. When you believe that you are not alone in your battles, when you trust that justice is not yours to enforce, but God's to deliver, your mind begins to settle. This anchoring truth forces anxious thoughts and fears to release their grip on you, easing the mental tension that keeps you feeling trapped. David understood something that has been confirmed by centuries of faith and now science. Peace isn't the absence of struggle, it's the presence of trust in the midst of struggle. Psalm 140 is a prayer that connects faith, mind, and body in one seamless whole. It satisfies the soul by pouring out every fear into God's hands, soothes the mind by breaking the cycle of anxiety through surrender, and protects the body by rewiring the stress response. Faith is the ultimate divine shield, not only because it connects us to God, but also because it transforms how we navigate life's challenges. As science continues to reveal the intricate mind-body connection, it only underscores the ancient truth written within Psalm 140. You are not designed to carry the weight alone. When you activate faith, when you speak the words of this psalm and believe the promises within it, you're engaging every part of your being in the process of receiving peace. The shield David prayed for is just as effective now, not only spiritually, but mentally and physically. The science of faith confirms what believers have always known. God's protection isn't an abstract idea. It's real, it's powerful, and it's waiting for you to embrace it. Stories of miraculous protection. What if I told you that the power of Psalm 140 has been living and breathing throughout history, shielding countless souls from harm and bringing divine deliverance when all seemed lost? This isn't just about ancient promises locked in time. It's about a spiritual shield that still works. today a living testimony to the power of faith in the one who rescues. The stories of deliverance, both in the Bible and in modern times, remind us that God's protection is as real now as it was when David penned these words. These stories aren't simply inspirational, they challenge us to trust that the same shield is available for whatever battles you're facing today. Let's begin with David himself, the man behind Psalm 140. His entire life is a testimony to God's miraculous protection. As a young shepherd boy, he stood against Goliath armed with nothing but a sling and faith. No one believed he could win, but God shielded him, turning the weakness of a boy into the strength to bring down a giant. When King Saul turned against him, hunting him out of jealousy, David was pursued relentlessly. He hid in caves, surrounded by traps set to end his life, spiraling into moments where defeat seemed inevitable. Yet time after time, God delivered him. From deadly ambushes to outright battles, David's survival was nothing short of miraculous. His prayers, like those in Psalm 140, became his lifeline, a constant reminder that his enemies would never have the final word. This theme of divine protection doesn't end with David. Throughout Scripture, miraculous deliverance is woven into the lives of God's people. Take Daniel, thrown into the lion's den for daring to remain faithful to God. The jaws of the lions should have meant his end, but divine intervention turned a night of terror into a night of peace. The mouths of his enemies were shut, quite literally, by the hand of God. Think also of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, tossed into the fiery furnace for refusing to bow to an idol. They walked into flames meant to consume them, yet emerged untouched because God himself walked with them. Stories like these are more than history, they are vivid illustrations of Psalm 140 in action, showing us what happens when you place your life in God's hands. But these miracles of deliverance didn't stop thousands of years ago. Even in recent history, there are countless testimonies of people shielded by God's protection in the most impossible circumstances. During World War II, for example, a small group of Jewish Christians fled Nazi persecution and found themselves cornered in a forest. Soldiers combed the woods, forcing everyone into hiding. One of the fateful hiding groups gathered together to pray Psalm 140, desperately begging God for protection. Despite the enemy sweeping through the area, their group exposed in a makeshift shelter was never discovered. It was as if an invisible wall hid them from harm. Later, one survivor would write that she felt as though a physical shield had surrounded them as they prayed. The miraculous isn't reserved for warlike struggles or extraordinary circumstances. Sometimes God's protection shows up in quiet ways, just as powerful. Perhaps you've heard stories of someone avoiding a deadly accident on the road because they felt an inexplicable tug to take a different route. Or individuals sharing how they prayed for guidance in toxic environments and suddenly saw obstacles removed, allowing them to escape harm. These aren't coincidences. They're stories of God taking an active role in shielding people who have entrusted their battles to Him. Yet perhaps the most remarkable stories are those where deliverance comes not by escaping harm, but by finding peace and strength in the midst of it. A cancer survivor shares how Psalm 140 became her prayer during relentless treatments. Though her body felt weak, her spirit was fortified each time she read, "Keep me safe, Lord, from the hands of the wicked." For her, the wicked wasn't a person, but a disease threatening to consume her. By trusting God fully, her victory wasn't just in physical healing, it was in knowing that nothing, not even suffering, could separate her from His care. These stories repeatedly drive home the heart of Psalm 140. God doesn't promise a life free from enemies or challenges, but He does promise His presence and His protection. Whether it's physical deliverance from harm or spiritual resilience in the face of overwhelming hardship, the shield described in this psalm is active, alive, and available to everyone who calls upon it. The words of David remind us that no matter how strong the opposition may seem, no enemy is greater than the God we serve. So now ask yourself, what battles surround you today? Who or what threatens your peace, your safety, or your faith? The stories of deliverance, both ancient and modern, show us that God's promises are not reserved for a select few. They are for anyone who dares, like David, to cry out with faith, "Rescue me, Lord." The shield of divine protection is not weakened by time, nor is it diminished by the size of your problem. It remains unbroken, unshakable, and ready to surround you when you trust in it. Let these stories remind you that no matter how impossible the odds appear, miracles do happen, and they happen for those who turn to Him, breaking free from fear step by step. Fear is often the silent force governing our decisions, shaping our days, and stealing our peace. You wake up with it. You carry it with you into every task, every interaction. It whispers lies, telling you that you aren't enough, that you won't survive this next challenge, that you are alone. Fear doesn't simply freeze you in moments of crisis. It works subtly, building a prison around your mind and heart, leaving you stuck in a cycle of anxiety, doubt, and inaction. Psalm 140, however, is more than a cry of desperation. It becomes a roadmap for breaking free from fear by leading us back to the protective and unshakable presence of God. David wrote Psalm 140 in the face of real and tangible threats. He wasn't speaking figuratively about his enemies. They were actively plotting harm, hunting him down with the intent to destroy him. Yet, his response wasn't to let fear consume him or control his actions. His cry, "Rescue me, Lord, from evildoers," marks a critical turning point. David chooses to name his fear and place it squarely in God's hands. This is where breaking free from fear begins. You have to acknowledge it, call it out, and refuse to allow it to dictate your life. Fear grows strongest in the absence of truth. It thrives in silence, convincing you to internalize your struggles, isolate yourself, and build walls to protect your vulnerabilities. But Psalm 140 takes a radically different approach. David confronts his fears head-on, praying openly and specifically about what he's facing. "Protect me from the violent," he prays, "who devise ways to trip my feet." There's a power in this kind of vulnerability, a deliberate decision to be honest about what weighs on you and to release it to the only one who can truly handle it. When you pour your heart out to God, you rob fear of its control and shift the burden away from your own strength. The next step in breaking free is to understand that fear's power is rooted in deception. Think about David's description of his enemies. Their tongues are sharp, their words are venomous. Isn't it often the case that fear enters our lives in the form of lies whispered into our hearts? "You'll fail if you try. You're not strong enough. No one cares." These are words designed to paralyze you, to make you believe that deliverance is impossible. But the promises in Psalm 140 dismantle these lies. "I know that the Lord secures justice for the poor and upholds the cause of the needy." This truth is a foundation that exposes fear for what it is, an oppressor without real authority. Prayer becomes transformative at this stage. It's not merely a request for God to take away the fear. It's an active declaration of trust in His ability to carry you through it. When you pray, you align yourself with a power greater than any opponent, visible or invisible. Psalm 140 isn't just about naming fears, it's about declaring that they will not win. By saying, "Rescue me, Lord," You remind yourself that freedom doesn't come from your ability to control everything happening around you. It comes from surrendering to the one who already has control. But faith without action is incomplete. David's cry for protection wasn't a call to sit idly and hope his circumstances would magically change. Prayer leads to movement. Step by step, you begin to confront the situations fear has kept you trapped in for so long. Breaking free might mean having a difficult conversation you've been avoiding. It might involve leaving a toxic environment, stepping into an unknown path, or even trusting someone again after betrayal. Fear will always tell you it's safer to stay where you are. But faith calls you forward, reminding you that God's shield moves with you. Even in the face of overwhelming fear, gratitude becomes a weapon. David doesn't let his prayer spiral into despair. He concludes by praising God's future deliverance. Surely the righteous will praise your name, and the upright will live in your presence. Gratitude disarms fear by forcing your focus onto what is steadfast, what never changes God's goodness. To wake up each day and thank God before the battle is won isn't just an act of hope. It's a declaration to fear that it has no power over you. Gratitude shifts your perspective, helping you see that deliverance isn't a distant promise, but a reality unfolding right now. Breaking free from fear also means learning to live moment by moment in God's presence. Fear convinces you to live in the imaginary future, constantly worrying about what might happen. David's call to live upright in God's presence reminds us that peace can only be found in the now. When you trust that God is already protecting you, already working on your behalf, the need to control the future fades. You don't have to figure out every what if, you just have to trust in every right now. Building rituals of prayer, gratitude, and surrender into your daily life is the final step in dismantling fear's grip. When Psalm 140 is read, prayed, and internalized regularly, it becomes more than a psalm, it becomes a rhythm to live by. Day by day, fear loses its hold as you lean into the promises of this divine shield. No matter how loud fear's voice may be, it cannot stand in the presence of God's protection. Freedom is found not in escaping the storms of life, but in knowing the one who carries you through them. Hope, resilience, through faith. If Psalm 140 teaches us anything, it is that hope is not born from the absence of struggle, but from the presence of faith in the midst of it. David, surrounded by enemies and weighed down by betrayal, does not cry out in hopeless defeat. Instead, he sings a psalm that resonates with trust, resilience, and a fierce belief in the faithfulness of God. Hope, as expressed in this psalm, is not a passive wish for circumstances to improve. It is an active posture of the heart, deeply rooted in knowing who God is and what He promises. In moments of despair, hope can feel distant, almost unreachable. When fear closes in, when failure looms large, or when you feel overwhelmed by the relentless pressures of life, the idea of pushing forward seems impossible. But Psalm 140 reminds us that hope is not something we create on our own. It begins with God. David's words, "I know that the Lord secures justice for the poor and upholds the cause of the needy," show an unwavering confidence in the character of God. This is not wishful thinking, it is certainty. It's the kind of hope that transforms how you view your struggles, no matter how impossible they may seem. Resilience doesn't come from avoiding life's difficulties. It's built by walking through the fire and trusting that God is shaping something greater in the process. David's life was a series of battles, both external and internally. He endured because his focus was not on the size of his enemies, but on the faithfulness of his God. Even as he faced slander and betrayal, he looked to God as his protector, his deliverer, and his refuge. This mindset of reliance builds the kind of resilience that can withstand anything. Many people mistake hope for an empty optimism, an idea that things will eventually just get better. But if you anchor your hope on changing circumstances, it will falter every time. David shows us that true hope is not attached to outcomes, but to God Himself. "You are my God. Hear my cry for mercy, Lord." These words are deeply personal, reflecting a relationship rooted in trust. David's hope didn't depend on escaping his immediate situation, but on the assurance that God was with him in it. This kind of trust is what strengthens the soul, creating a resilience that cannot be shaken by external events. Faith, at its core, allows you to hold on to hope even when you cannot see the way forward. Psalm 140 gives voice to the tension between the reality of life's hardships and the promise of God's protection. We see David's raw honesty in admitting his fear and expressing his desperation. But woven into that vulnerability is absolute confidence. "Surely the righteous will praise your name, and the upright will live in your presence." This is the language of someone who knows that no matter how dark the night gets, it will not last forever. Hope, fueled by faith, doesn't deny the existence of challenges. It looks beyond them, trusting in the one who holds the future. Living with hope means refusing to let despair write the final chapter of your story. It is standing firm in the belief that God's justice will prevail, even when the world seems unfair. It is trusting that God's protection surrounds you, even when you feel vulnerable. Hope acknowledges the pain, but doesn't let it extinguish the light. Every time you pray Psalm 140, you are participating in this act of hope, declaring that the battles you face do not have the final word. The act of lifting your fears to God and thanking Him for His deliverance, even before it arrives, is the ultimate declaration of trust. Resilience through hope also creates action. A hopeful heart doesn't sit back and wait. It moves forward, step by step, trusting that God is guiding the way. David didn't escape his trials by hiding. He faced them, armed with faith. When you hope in God, you don't shy away from the challenges before you. Instead, you face them differently, no longer consumed by fear, but strengthened by the assurance that you are not walking alone. This active, faith-filled hope becomes the driving force behind resilience. It doesn't erase the struggle, but it empowers you to overcome it. Psalm 140 concludes not in despair, but in triumph. "Surely the righteous will praise your name, and the upright will live in your presence." These words are as much a promise as they are a victory. They remind us that hope, grounded in faith, will always lead to joy, even if the journey feels long and difficult. When the psalm speaks of the upright living in God's presence, it is describing the ultimate hope, not just surviving life's challenges, but thriving in the unshakable peace of being connected to God, no matter what you are facing. Psalm 140 reminds us all that God's protection is not a distant possibility, but a present reality. Hope isn't about the absence of pain or struggle. It's about trusting that God is working through every situation, shaping you, protecting you, and leading you toward His greater purpose. Resilience through faith doesn't happen overnight, but as you continue to align your heart with God's promises, hope grows. It grows into the strength that allows you to take the next step, then the one after that, until you find yourself not just enduring your battles, but emerging victorious from them. Psalm 140 is not just a story of David's struggles. It's an invitation to live differently, to step into a life marked by trust, courage, and divine protection. It challenges you to take action, not simply to admire the words, but to embody them, letting them reshape how you approach the battles you face every day. This psalm isn't meant to stay within the pages of Scripture. It's meant to come alive in your heart and flow into every corner of your life. The pressing question is this: will you take the first step toward claiming the shield of faith that is already waiting for you? This call to action begins with a choice. It's easy to live defensively, reacting to every challenge and carrying the weight of your struggles alone. But David's example pushes us towards something greater. When he cried, "Rescue me, Lord," he wasn't just asking for help, he was declaring that he would no longer attempt to navigate the chaos of life with his own limited strength. He invited God into the fight. He made the deliberate choice to surrender control to the one who is infinitely capable. This same decision is open to you right now. No matter where you are in life, whether you feel like you're standing firm or barely holding on, you have the opportunity to place everything into God's hands and trust Him to be your shield. Start by making Psalm 140 a part of your daily rhythm. Don't just read it, speak its words over your life with conviction. Let its declaration of trust and its cries for deliverance guide your prayers, shape your mindset, and remind you of the power of living in faith. As you begin your day, ask yourself, what are the enemies I'm facing right now? Where am I desperate for protection? Then, lift those concerns to God, humbly and boldly declare, "Rescue me, Lord." The act of praying like this doesn't just invite God into your circumstances, it transforms how you approach them. You are no longer operating from a place of fear, but from a place of trust. Faith doesn't stop with prayer though. It's meant to be lived out. Consider the areas of your life where fear, doubt, or opposition have kept you stagnant. What steps do you need to take to move forward in trust? Action fueled by faith doesn't mean pretending the battles aren't real or risky. It simply means knowing you don't face them alone. Maybe this looks like pursuing a difficult conversation that's long overdue, bravely taking a leap into new opportunities, or rebuilding something fear stole from you. Whatever it is, move confidently, knowing God's shield goes before you. There is also an incredible power in sharing this journey with others. Just as David wrote Psalm 142, record his faith and inspire those who would come after him. You can use your own life as a testimony. Think of the people around you who need the hope offered in this psalm. Maybe there's someone in your life battling their own unseen enemies. Someone who feels alone, afraid, or broken under the weight of their struggles. Take this moment to invite them into the story of God's protection. Speak the words of Psalm 140 to them, or better yet, pray it with them. The resilience and courage that God has worked in you have the power to echo into the lives of others, becoming a ripple of faith that touches far beyond your immediate reach. This call to action also invites us to reframe how we view our struggles. Look at the challenges before you not as obstacles, but as opportunities for God to show His strength. When life feels overwhelming, let it drive you closer to God, not further away. Like David, let your cry for protection be a reminder of where your true strength lies. When you surrender your battles to Him, you're not walking away from the fight. You're walking into it with a shield that cannot be broken. Finally, take a moment to reflect. How will you step into this promise today? Psalm 140 gives us a choice. We can either continue to carry our burdens alone, or humbly surrender them to a God who promises to be our refuge. Will you keep fighting with your own limited strength, or will you hand over the reins to the one who never fails? In surrender, there is freedom. In trust, there is peace. And in choosing to act on the promises of Psalm 140, there is victory waiting for you. This is your moment. Like David, you hold the choice to cry out, "Rescue me, Lord," and to step forward in faith, knowing that God is faithful to defend you. His shield of protection is not something distant or theoretical. It's available to you here and now. The enemies you face, whether external or internal, do not have the final say. Turn to Him, trust in Him, live boldly under the shelter of His promises. Now, take this truth and let it change how you move through today. Share it, live it, and trust it. This psalm wasn't written to stay on a page, was written to be lived. So go and live it.